We'll start first with prayer, then I'll tell you a little bit about my background, and then we'll jump into this whole chapter on the Last Supper and the Passion of Christ. So I'm Nick Tortorella. I've been in the church since here at Westminster since 2016. I served a 6-year term as deacon. I'm a Stephen minister. I visited nursing homes to serve communion. I've led the Tuesday morning fellowship for a year, various Bible studies, and men's religious retreat. So I've been active in this church.
Can I ask you a question?
Of course.
I asked Eric because I would like to go and just be there when you give communion. Can you give communion without being a pastor?
No, you got to be trained to be a Stephen minister.
So you've been trained.
Yeah, it's not very elaborate because you have a script to follow, and part of it is doing the communion, but part of it is also bringing comfort to that person that you're there with, because most of them are in nursing homes, and some are more hobbled or feeble than others.
Well, I know the deacons, so the deacons also do communion, so you have to be a church officer.
That's why.
Right, but the deacons still take a separate training in serving communion.
Correct, yes, we do,
And I wanted
yes,
to
we
go
do.
with him because I was a caretaker.
Right.
So I kind of know what you're talking about. You give them comfort, you talk to them, how you
Exactly.
been, you know what I mean?
Exactly.
But I've never been in there when they did communion. So they said, just try to pick someone that's going one day and just
You
go.
can go as an accompaniment to
That's
see.
what they said.
Yeah, you can go as an accompaniment with somebody who's no set to do it.
When do you usually go?
Usually it's Sundays.
And that's after our church
Yes,
service.
like we used to go 1, 2, 3 in the afternoon on Sunday to the.
Well, if you could fit me in one time,
Yeah, I stopped doing it, but I'll find somebody for you that can.
because I really want to go and I want to see how it's done. I know the back end of it.
Yeah.
As far as, carekeeping and stuff like that, but I don't know the front end of
It's
it.
very simple, and you pick up the materials in Barbara's office. There's a big blue bag usually, and it's got all the materials you need, the communion wafers.
It was underneath.
Like the blue bags.
That is the blue, that's what they're
That's what's
taking.
in the blue bags.
That's what they're taking today for Communion Sunday.
That's correct.
Mhm.
All right, so let's just start with a prayer, and then we'll get into this, because I also want to go to that vision thing after this. Dear Lord, thank you for bringing this group of people together as a faith community to understand your word, lead us to take actions, make this world a better place with less division, racism, and intolerance. Amen. So how many of you read this chapter? Just curious. Okay, you did too.
I got to about half of it.
Let me start with you this way. What in your mind is a covenant? What in your own words would you say a covenant is? There's several of them talked about in the Bible. The Old Testament is a covenant with God and the people of Israel. In the New Testament, we talk about communion. Well, what in your own words is a covenant?
I would say it'd be communion.
Communion. What way is it? In what way is it a covenant?
To me, it's a covenant, you're going before, getting the body, going through like what we just did.
Okay. Anybody else?
Like a very personalized agreement, commitment,
Between you and,
God.
so in legal terms, it's a bilateral agreement. Where there's a recipient and a giver. And in both cases, it's an agreement between both sides. That's why it's usually called a bilateral agreement. It's two sides agreeing to do something. And sometimes it does take on legal import, takes on the degree of being a promise. but it's definitely a meeting of the minds on some issue or topic. And we know that Bible talks about the covenant between God and his people, who's Israel, and they're free. And with Jesus, he has a covenant with us. And in the Protestant church, communion is considered symbolic. In the Catholic Church, they believe you're really taking in the body and blood of Jesus. And Catholics believe that once you have Jesus inside of you, you can really nurture that and develop it into doing good actions. Don Lincoln and I had a conversation about this once, and he explained to me that the Presbyterian Church sees it as a symbolic act. You're recreating what Jesus did at the Last Supper. But it's important to know that Catholics really do think they are taking in the body and blood literally of Jesus, and therefore changed by it.
Although I was Catholic, I didn't believe that.
You didn't believe it? That's fine. You want to talk about that?
Well, I didn't realize I didn't believe it until I became Presbyterian and realized that I'm more aligned with this all my life than ever before. And when I converted, my family disowned me, but they were really like, well, how you don't believe you're actually literally eating the body and blood of Christ. I'm like, no, I guess I never believed that. Although I do still consider communion to be a very special thing. I do sometimes miss not getting it more frequently, but at prior church, I was at another Presbyterian church, only did it a couple times a year. So I'm grateful that we at least do it once a month here. I do also think it makes it more special because it really prompted my hiney to get up out of bed this morning because I knew that it was.
Because you knew it was communion Sunday.
I cut the communion last night, so I had to bring it. Y'all would have been mad at me if I didn't show up. But I mean, seriously, like communion probably still means more to me than maybe some lifelong Presbyterians because of my Catholic indoctrination. But do this in remembrance of me, which is what Luke said, is not literally that you're eating.
No, we're gonna get into
Yeah,
what
so
the remembrance of me means.
So I don't truly know what Catholics believe because I was a lifelong Catholic, 12 years of Catholic school, and they never really ever said that. I mean, I think that's what's implied, what we're supposed to believe, but it was never really said.
Right. Well, I'm a political scientist by training, and I spent 50 years doing surveys. So I've surveyed people on all kinds of subjects. But when you survey Catholics, there's about, I'd say 60% that think they're taking in literally the body and blood, 40% don't.
So I was a Presbyterian, I was a Protestant, and then I was a Catholic, then I'm back to Protestant. And so I've always felt like no Catholic really thinks that there's blood, that they're drinking blood. They can see that it doesn't look like blood. So I think God can make it the actual body and blood or not. So I don't think it's that important. It amazes me that this divided us for so many years. It was a huge problem for people.
But it's an important difference because some things in the Bible people take literally and some take more symbolically. So it's not just communion that has that problem.
But we're so much closer than we realize, and that's an example.
Well, I'll tell you, I not only went to Catholic school during my elementary years, I have a master's from a Catholic seminary, which was St. Joseph's, and I'm very comfortable in both places. I go both places because the readings are the same. We're on book C this year. Catholics have 7 sacraments, Protestants have 4. But there aren't really major differences at all. That's one of the differences is about communion, which I had talks with Don Lincoln about. But the point is there is something called communion. Certain people get certain things from it, other people get other things. And it's important to think that way, that when we read the Bible, people are going to interpret it differently. They're going to see things differently. Why do you think the author, Don, I'm sorry.
When I'm Orthodox, so I'm Ukrainian Orthodox. We had communion every service. We had communion at every service, and like I told you, when Easter came around, we put passes together of bread, kibasi, and everything like that, and we lined it along the church, and we blessed it all.
Right.
So, I mean, each church, I guess, each denomination does do things different.
Right, and weddings are different too, things like that. Greek Orthodox, also their Bible is different. Greek Orthodox, there's no book of Revelation.
Mhm.
Catholic Bible and Protestant Bible, there is a book of Revelation, right, Joseph?
Yes.
Joseph's in my Bible study, so he's heard me talk about certain of these things. Why though in this are we, well, let's start this way. What differences do you see between Mark and Matthew in the Gospel of Luke? Do you see a different emphasis or a different style?
Matthew doesn't really talk a lot about Jesus.
Right.
Right?
Right?
He doesn't talk a lot about him.
Anybody else have any thoughts?
Luke is more touchy-feely, much more like, I don't know, talking about like the outcasts and the marginalized and I don't know, just kind of more like a people person, like more like a down-to-earth kind of guy versus Mark and Matthew, which are kind of like a little bit more elevated.
Yeah, you're exactly right. I mean, Luke gives us much more detail about Jesus and what he did, his
Like
miracles,
his humanness too.
and his humanness that we're going to talk about. And also what makes him a different kind of leader than other leaders of the time when you think about Caesar or Pharaoh. He really does try to narrow down what the Christian message is and what Jesus is in terms of the type of leader he is.
I think that Mark tends to emphasize that Jesus is the Messiah. And of course, he's hiding it the whole way through until we get to almost the last week. Whereas Matthew's emphasis is that Jesus is the new Moses.
Right. Right. So they all have their own distinct way of reporting what they saw, what they heard, and some of the effects of Jesus's life. Why in Luke does he talk about there being two cups as opposed to there being just one cup? That surprised you, huh, Joseph?
Well, wasn't the one cup empty? It didn't have enough to go around.
Well, actually, it's kind of a tricky question because although there's two cups talked about, we know that the one cup is about the wine. The other cup is supposed to be symbolic of the body. Okay, nobody's giving each other unleavened bread and saying, here's the body. But he talks about the body in the second cup. And the important thing to come away with from that is what does the body represent and what does the blood represent? Lori Albert, if you're there, hello. Go ahead.
No, I was just waiting for Laurie.
Just waving to Lori, okay. I was hoping you were waving
I
at
was
me.
hoping she was gonna answer.
Could you repeat the question, Nick?
She's
I
in
lost
the-
part of
The question really is the two different cups. And what does the body represent? What does the blood represent?
It's funny because we're so used to lumping it together.
We do lump it together.
Even for you.
Right. Well, there's no right answer, but what the author talks about is that through the body is how the kingdom of God comes together. And among his people, he's much more inclusive, right? It's the oppressed, it's the poor, it's the downtrodden. It's basically people in society who've been ignored and displaced. The blood comes to represent more of his connection to us. It involves all the miracles he's done, He's inclusive of all people. And the blood gets to the question of remembrance. What do you think remembrance means when he says, remembrance of me? Do this in remembrance of me.
Probably to remember the sacrifice of his living that way and ultimately being executed for living that way. And because of that, and because of the resurrection, really, to me, it's the resurrection that becomes the key part that, gives validity to his message and consequently is going to guide us with truthfulness as we go forward.
I take it as he's kind of telling them, I'm giving you forgiveness of sin. That I'm going to sacrifice myself that, for the forgiveness of sin.
Anybody else?
Well, when we do that in remembrance of him, it's almost like giving us the encouragement to carry on and live a life worthy of the covenant that we've created with God.
Right. Again, it's almost like the covenant. It's a two-way street. We have to remember him and he remembers us.
And didn't he, with Jesus, he went over beauty and he did all laughter and everything like that, and take care of your loved ones and take care of your kids and help people like that. And basically it came down to who would send their only son down to be killed, and he's first. So, I mean, that was saying that, hey, I gave my son up for the forgiveness of your sin.
Correct. And the suffering that Jesus goes through is symbolic of the blood that he loses. Why do you think the apostles in the Garden of Gethsemane fall asleep? Remember, Jesus is in real agony. He's sweating blood. He knows what's coming. They're all asleep.
He talks in the book about the kind of the hopelessness. They were either sleeping or feigning sleep. They're just overwhelmed, he thought.
Yeah, he talks about them being in agony as well, in a different kind of way, and they're exhausted because they've been going through the last few days and trying to avoid the Romans, and they know the Romans are after them, so they're pretty tired.
And I know when people are depressed, they feel like, oh, it doesn't help to stay up to do anything.
Exactly.
There's nothing I can do to make a difference, and you feel disempowered. So,
And you can kind of forget if you retreat and you go to sleep and you just kind of like shut it out, but it doesn't change it. It's when you wake up, it's still there, but it's just like a temporary numbing of your mind.
Right.
Could it mean they really didn't believe in him?
I don't know if you can go that far. I think it was more, they've been within the last few days, they knew what was coming, they were tired, they're trying to avoid the Romans. And what happens when the Romans finally show up? What takes place? What does Peter do?
Well, he asked.
Peter chops his ear, one of the soldiers' ears. And Jesus basically said, stop this. And Jesus knew all along that he could cause violence. And it was the last thing he wanted to happen. I think it's also a reason why, when Caiaphas is trying to find out who he is, and he's asked whether he's the Messiah or not, Jesus doesn't really want to answer the question, because whether he answers it to Caiaphas or he answers it to Pilate, it's going to be the wrong answer in terms of what they want to hear. And again, it could lead to more violence and bloodshed, something which he's really trying to avoid. I have a question for you guys, gals. Let's talk about Judas for a second. So Judas betrays him, then feels guilt, and brings the coins back and throws them back, whatever he does about the coins. But then he goes and kills himself. So if he told Jesus he was really sorry and put the money back, and he didn't kill himself, would Judas be treated differently in this whole story? Would Jesus have forgiven him? Can elaborate.
I mean, because Jesus will forgive all if you're truly sorry. It can't just be lip service, but it's just much the same with Peter. I mean, except that Peter didn't go off and kill himself. But I think it also speaks about Judas and how Judas felt about himself and that he wasn't worthy of forgiveness. So therefore, why would Jesus forgive him? Because he didn't believe he was worthy of that.
Mhm.
And at least for me, it teaches me because I am like a Judas. I don't think anyone will ever forgive me if I'm not perfect. But I realize that I have to understand that God can and will forgive me if I am truly sorry. And it's taking the coward's way out just to say, well, I'm going to end it all.
Right.
And so that gives me the encouragement to keep going when I compare that to what Peter did, because, I mean, was either one better or worse? I mean, they both betrayed him in some way.
Not only that, but Peter denied him 3 times.
Right.
Well, he said to Peter, at the Last
With a
Supper,
cock crows.
Peter, do you love me?
Yeah.
Peter, do you love me? He goes, yes, master. I always thought that that's when he was in Jerusalem and he, I don't know. That those 3 things he said at the Last Supper was the same thing he meant when he was crucified. I don't know if that's true or not.
But the point is, Jesus did forgive Peter for denying him 3 times. I agree with you. And again, we don't know the real answer, but I agree with you that if Judas had really gone to him and said, I'm really sorry, and asked for forgiveness, then take his own life, I think he would have been forgiven.
A priest was explaining confession and forgiveness to me, and he said, the only sin I can't forgive is the sin of not believing that you can be forgiven,
Right.
because they can't receive it,
Wasn't that a big thing for Judas, though he couldn't forgive himself?
That's correct.
Right.
It's also a reflection of how he felt about himself.
Yeah.
But that's a good point. I mean, Madeline Murray O'Hare, who was an avowed atheist,
Yeah.
right? She totally denied there was a God or a Jesus or whatever. If at the end she had said to him, I'm sorry, I realize you do exist and whatever, he would have forgiven her, I have no doubt. Instead, she died by violence. She was killed by somebody.
The same priest told me, I can't say that Adolf Hitler was not forgiven, because I was not there at the end between him and his maker, and I thought that's the most extreme example you could give of
Right.
no one being
Well, another way I think of it is the real sin is if you abandon Jesus. You can have questions, you can have doubts, but if you totally abandon, then I think you're really on your own. There's a great story, and forgive me, Joseph, because I know you've heard me say this before. There's a great story in Crime and Punishment by Dostoevsky. In Dostoevsky in Crime and Punishment, there's a guy, Raskolnikov, who takes up rent in an apartment, and he ends up killing the landlady, for whatever reason. And the whole thing, the book is about his guilt about killing this woman. And at the end of the book, they talk about the Last Judgment. And the key line is, he looked at the murderers, the atheists, the rapists, the worst of humankind, and said, you too shall enter the kingdom. And all the judges around him are going, what are you doing? What are you letting the worst of the worst in? And Jesus responds, because not one of them thinks they deserve this. So there's a real pushing a kind of thing about forgiveness. But it's an interesting concept that even the worst can be saved. It's just a matter of where they're coming from. And I always liked that story, that the fact they didn't think they deserved it showed some kind of remorse or understanding of the things that they had done wrong. So again, it's another kind of flavor of what forgiveness is about.
And Judas didn't do that.
No, that's the problem.
Yeah, no, he didn't do that.
Because, we believe God gives us life and he owns our life, in essence. So when you commit suicide, you're basically making that decision to abandon God, abandon everything that you can put. But when we say the Apostles' Creed, right? On Friday, he gets crucified in his terrible pain and agony. He visits hell on Saturday, which means there are people in hell if you believe the Apostles' Creed. And then he's resurrected on Sunday. So you go from this pain and anguish through hell to joy on Easter when he's resurrected. So notice the progression. And Jesus says, take up your cross and follow me. What he's saying is, you're going to really follow my teachings. It's going to cause you some suffering. It's going to cause you some pain and agony. But it's through that pain and agony that you will not only better yourself, but you'll understand me more. And therefore, you're in essence, saving yourself.
He does say, I'll be with you.
Yes,
He does.
he always says, if you need me, I'm there. You can pray to him. Joe knows too. Joseph knows also. I talked about in our Bible study, talking directly to God.
He said, it might not happen overnight, but I am here with you.
Right. And you can talk to God. You can pray to God. And I believe you can argue with God.
I'm not going to try it.
If you don't like it, talk to him about it.
He's got big shoulders, he can take it.
Check in with Job.
He's strong enough.
Check with Job.
Oh, he argued with God. Yeah.
Well, if you really go through the Bible carefully, you look for that. There's a lot of different people who argue with Jesus and God at different points about a lot of different things. And nobody's ever said you can't disagree or can't talk to him about it. I find that to have those conversations, usually you learn something through them, not only about yourself, but where you think Jesus is coming from.
I think sometimes we argue with him, we're a little bit like toddlers, but no, this isn't right. And he's just kind of going, okay, give him time.
That's right. I think that's the response.
Developing.
I'll give you time to think about this.
Mhm.
I'm not going to yell at you. I'm not going to say you're wrong. Think about it.
I'm gonna bring you along at your pace.
Right.
It will be okay. That's what he says.
Well, that's his promise. His promise is if you really keep him in your heart, you really do pray, you're never going to be let that far astray. You may have some pain and you may have suffering. You'll have disappointments. You'll lose people in your family who die. Those things are all part of being alive about. But in the end, you'll be okay because you have that relationship. It's a two-way relationship. I found this part of the book fascinating. He talks about the fact that Pilate sends Jesus, and I think it's only in Luke. Pilate sends Jesus to see Herod. Why do you think that takes place? Why does Jesus get sent by Pilate to see Herod? No thoughts?
Well, Pilate didn't want to make the decision.
Right. Pilate was constantly trying not to take responsibility for killing Jesus. But what was the other reason he would send him to Herod?
Well, I'm not quite sure of my history here, but was Herod a Jew, but working for the Roman government? And so it's kind of ironic here that he's sending him over to the king of the Jews, so to speak. And of course, it was one way to maybe shift the responsibility to somebody else. And at the same time, here's a Jew overseeing the Jews, maybe get him to do the dirty work.
Right.
And at the same time, keep the peace within the Roman Empire.
Correct. Herod's an interesting guy because if you in the book, he says, I sent him there because he was a Galilean. By being a Galilean, he was saying he's a Jew too. So I wanted him to have the shot at Jesus as well. Now, whether it's the same Herod, because I get confused by all these different Herods, but whether or not it's the same Herod, the original Herod that we hear about, even as a baby, is curious about him and wants to find him, and is hoping to question the wise men on their way back about Jesus and what he's about. And they go a different way. So Herod doesn't get his shot at them to find out about Jesus. But now, if it's the same Herod, Pilate's sending him to Herod saying, he's a Jew like you, what do you want to do with him? And then Herod, let me just give you something parenthetically here. When I went to Israel, there's a place called Masada where the Jews were being persecuted by the Romans, and they went up to this butte, very high butte. It looks like Devil's Tower in Wyoming if you saw Encounters of the Third Kind, if you saw that movie. Masada looks like that, very craggy, very hard to climb. Anyway, 1,000 Jews got to the top of Masada, and they were soon surrounded by 6 legions of Romans soldiers who were going to kill them all. Now you're up there, you don't have food and water, and you're surrounded by 6 legions of Roman soldiers. Not a good prospect. Well, Herod, this is what they tell you in Israel, built a water system for that, for the Jews, secretly, but he created this unbelievably incredible creative thing where they could get the water from the ground, from the Mediterranean, get it up to the top of Masada for these Jews that were up there. And they also figured out ways to get food to them. So there's a case where Herod, because he was a fellow Jew, and he was, as you say, respected by the Romans, they didn't know he was doing this, he was actually trying to keep them alive. Now, the footnote to that story is, when the 6 legions get up to the top of Masada, they only found 38 Jews, and they killed those 38 Jews. So somehow, those almost 1,000 Jews got out of there somewhere. And they think they had built a tunnel somehow through that butte so they could escape. But it shows that the crazy kind of thing that Herod was. On one hand, he was a Jew who worked with the Romans. The Romans respected. He built aqueducts for them. He built bridges for them. He built ways to get water. But on the other hand, he was still a Jew, but he was a conservative Jew. So he was threatened by Jesus just like Pilate was, because Jesus represented a very kind of radical thing. The idea that even the oppressed, even the sick, even the dying could be raised and led to heaven. So as a result, they were threatened by him, and they needed him to somehow disappear. And so the Orthodox Jews wanted him dead. The Romans wanted him dead. Herod even wanted him dead because he was a threat to the order and society at that time. And a lot of people don't like to think of Jesus being a radical and a revolutionary. But when you really study it, he really was. The things he was teaching had never been heard of before. His ideas of including everybody, even Gentiles, forget about the Jews being the chosen people, but he's also preaching to Gentiles, so was Paul and Peter, that it became a movement that's still alive today. And all those other ones, faded into the past. So you have to look at these things from both sides, understand where the enemies are coming from, the supporters are coming from, and then see how it kind of evolved, and our thinking evolves as a result of it.
What happened to Princess Pilate?
What happened to Pontius Pilate?
Yeah. I mean,
He lived a pretty good long life, and they called him back to Rome eventually.
but would he go to heaven or?
Oh, you're asking me if you should go.
Because there's nowhere.
I'll avoid answering that
You're
question.
talking the wrong state.
Yeah, I've never read anything about it.
No, I don't.
It was interesting what you said about Herod, because I didn't know anything about that. That was the same Herod that wanted him dead as a child
Mhm.
when they went and took the firstborn. But I think what it also,
You're right.
just I learned about that.
Guys.
What I learned about Herod just now is that, and I think it's important for all humanity to know that there's good in all people, no matter how bad they are. So Herod maybe is a terrible person, but as you were explaining, Nick, about him building things so that they could get the water up to the Jews, that doesn't mean that everything bad he did is completely forgotten, but what it means to me at least is that even in the worst people that we see, there is that good. And I think that's important to carry with us.
In the story I told you about crime and punishment, that humility of not thinking they deserve to be saved, in essence, is almost something that is strong enough to save.
Yeah.
Because at bottom, they're saying, I guess maybe I was wrong. I shouldn't have led the life I led.
And everything's not black and white.
No,
And
a lot of gray.
I grew up with black and white, but it is pretty much gray. And a lot of what we do is gray.
Exactly.
So thank you.
Let's talk about forgiveness. What do you think the strength of forgiveness is? What comes out of forgiveness? What power comes out of forgiveness? When we can forgive our enemies or forgive people who hurt us in some way,
Love, peace.
that's an outcome.
Yeah.
Could be love and peace. Right? Anything else?
When you don't forgive, there's a lot of things going on inside you in your body that aren't good for your body, that aren't good for your soul. There's all this. And we feel often like that person made me do this. I'm suffering because that person made me do it. But when we say, I forgive, you don't have to say, do it to me again. I'm going to get in that position. But we're going to say, I'm not going to live my life with all that, grinding in my stomach and all that.
Yeah, you hit
I
a very
release
key
this
point.
situation.
The key point is when you forgive, it helps you.
Mhm.
When you can forgive and put it in your rearview mirror, it doesn't control you anymore. And it raises a lot of questions. It raises about violence and how we treat that. And a really good example, Joseph, I think you'll remember this, right here in Nickel, Pennsylvania, there was a guy a couple of years ago, very long ago, who went into an elementary school and shot 10 kids and killed them. Right here in Nickel, Pennsylvania. The
Where was
Amish,
that?
Nickel, Pennsylvania.
Was that by Lancaster?
Probably.
Lancaster.
Yeah, it's near
Daughter
Lancaster.
lived around the corner and they forgive them the next day.
And the Amish ended up forgiving first the family, because the family they felt wasn't responsible for the acts of the son. And later on, as they got to know the family, and they actually would meet with them every year and have a meal together and tell them that they were forgiven for what happened, they eventually also were able to forgive the shooter. So that kind of forgiveness is not usually around. And that kind of understanding and willpower to even take the next step and have a meal with them every year to say, we forgive you because we don't think you were responsible for what your son did. But on the other hand, they also got further where they could forgive the shooter himself. I mean, that's an amazing kind of miracle in itself when people can forgive. And like you said, Meg, when you forgive, it takes a load off of you. You don't have to live with that anxiety and twisting in your stomach, the anger feeling.
Right. That happened this week.
Go ahead, tell me.
A young man at a student at a high school was stabbed to death by another
All
student.
right, there was a wrestling tournament or something?
It might,
Was it a wrestling tournament?
no, it was an outdoor run, I think they looked like they were dressed, in track type of running gear.
Okay.
The report I saw it didn't say what.
Well, they had a big
measure.
fight recently,
The dad of the murdered kid, said, I forgave him, not so much for him, but for myself. I couldn't go through life with that burden of the angst and the anger. And he said, I forgave him, and it lifted a burden off of me. It's two-way street.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And it goes back again to the concept of a covenant. It's reciprocal. It's both ways. It can't be one way. And the other thing that he makes a point of, and I think he's right, is when the violence is taking place, it's happening, you can't forgive that. Because if you forgive the violence while it's taking place, like the Holocaust, it could further encourage you to do more of it. So you have to wait till it's all over, and calmer heads are existing, to actually be able to forgive. The violence has to be done with. You know, if you go to Israel today, you'll see there are German multinationals all over Israel. So obviously they've forgotten about, what happened with the Germans. Buyers there, a number of major German companies are in Israel. And of course, Israel and the Germans trade today. And look what happened with Pearl Harbor, right? We were all upset they came and surprise attack, they killed our soldiers in Pearl Harbor. And years later, we're trading with them. We're buying their cars. So to me, it always raises the question, what the hell is war about? If eventually you're going to sit down with the same people you're fighting, what's the point of the fighting? What's the point of the violence? It's something to think about.
We've been fighting our whole life.
Yeah.
I mean, there's never really been peace. Even when God was here, Jesus was here.
It seems to be part of human nature and life itself. The violence is there. The question is what you do with that violence. Can you forgive it at times? Should you forgive it? Should you not forgive it? What does it do both to the perpetuator and the receiver?
We also can't paint the brush with the whole nationality just because of the actions of few. Like my father was born in Germany. He lived in Germany during Hitler. He was in the shelters just like other people were here. And the more I read up on Holocaust, a lot of the Germans didn't even truly understand what all was happening. So to say that all Germans are bad because of what happened, or all Japanese were bad because of what happened, it's not an all or nothing thing.
You're absolutely right. I mean, look what happened. We went to Nuremberg, and we judged some of them, and we sentenced some of them to death, hanging and shootings, whatever way we killed them. On the other hand, the guys who were into the space and rockets, like Wernher von Braun, were brought over here and protected because they could teach us that technology. So murder sometimes becomes very self-serving.
In Germany, they had it where when you got off, some went to the left and they were killed, and some went to the right, because I read a book on it. And they had them out there putting tracks down in bare feet, and it's just unhuman. You just don't understand it.
Very arbitrary.
But your point is really well taken, that you can't dismiss a whole group of people or one race or one nationality because of the actions of some or a few. It's the wrong way to go. I'm sure there were Germans who did know what was happening, but didn't know how to stop it. And, they tried to kill Hitler a couple of times.
Well, even here in America, I mean, there's things happening that we know and we can't stop.
Right.
So someday they're gonna be looking at us and saying, what was wrong
Well,
with
the
these
American
people?
Indian could look at us and say
Right.
that.
Yeah.
Go read the book, Bury My Heart at Wounded Knee. you'll get a whole different idea about what we did to American Indian. So we've been guilty of the same thing. So are we a legitimate judge to judge others?
I don't think we're supposed to be judging. That's God's job.
Yeah, interesting question. So I think we're running out of time. So let me just close with this. There's different kinds of leadership. I remember I'm a political scientist by training, so I always think about leaders and what they say and what they do and what they don't do. Years ago, there was a article written by Isaiah Berlin called The Hedgehog and the Fox. And he posits in this article that the hedgehog knows the one most important thing, but the fox knows many things. And so when he looked at history, he would label different leaders as either foxes or hedgehogs. And if you remember in our reading here, Jesus calls Pilate a fox. Okay, so foxes know many things, but the hedgehog knows the one most important thing. Years later, when I was at Williams College, I had a professor, James McGregor Burns, and he wrote a book about Franklin Roosevelt. He was very good friends, close to Franklin. It's called Roosevelt, the Lion and the Fox. And basically, he said the same thing Isaiah Berlin did about Roosevelt, that he was really a fox. He knew how to run the country. He knew how to get us out of the Depression. He came up with the New Deal. He came up with many things. Whereas somebody like Jesus is really a hedgehog. He's more monofocused about saving us, saving our souls. He's not going to resort to chicanery or different programs and different deals necessarily to bring us along. He tries to talk to us directly into our heart and our minds and get us to change over time by what we experience. And again, suffering is a big point of that. There's lots of happiness and good memories we have. We also could probably point to some traumas and things that happened to us. But there's a belief in Christianity that through the traumas and the suffering is where we really grow and become more human, I guess I would say. So when you look at politics, you have to kind of look at it. What kind of leader is it? What was Caesar like? What was similar about Caesar versus Pharaoh? You know, what do we think today of our different presidents? But the question is leadership. What are we really looking for in a leader? What does a leader really do? Should he know many things, or should he be more like Christ and have the one most important thing? It's just something for you to think about. And if anybody has any thoughts or want to say anything, I'd certainly like to listen.
Part of the way Jesus taught is by living the way he did.
Excuse me?
Part of the way Jesus taught is by living the way he did, so setting the example.
Exactly. He did set an example.
And that's the moment when I think about remembering him and remembering, you know, at the communion, I think about following him.
In fact, one of my favorite expressions is something Jesus said, give them an impression of who I am. Basically saying to you, say to other people, give them an impression of what my life was about, who I am, and who you are now because as a result of it. It's one of my favorite sayings. If anybody has any other questions, feel free to go.